Evil Dead 2, I would say, is the most important film I've seen in my life because it is the film that got me into movies. And that is why I want to talk about it on this premiere episode on what I'm calling R.I.P. Cinema. A show eulogizing the art form we used to know as film. When I was a kid growing up in the country, my options were pretty much limited to what we owned on VHS and eventually DVD, and what was available at the local convenience store, the rack of DVD rentals. So obviously I had a very narrow diet of films for a long time. That is why Evil Dead 2 was about the most exciting thing I'd ever seen in my life. I learned how to, and I'm not endorsing this, mind you. This video is for entertainment purposes only. This is a joke. This is a parody. Satire. When I figured out how to pirate movies as a kid, it opened up a whole new world for me. And Evil Dead 2 was one of the first movies I went for. And I absolutely love it. Now, Evil Dead 2 has many imitators, but the key mistake I think they make is undermining the genre, of not showing it respect, of the filmmaker treating horror itself as something very flippant. This is why I'm not a huge fan of Cabin in the Woods, which I think takes a slightly snarky approach to horror. It just has a kind of attitude that I don't totally vibe with. Whereas Evil Dead 2 certainly has a meta aspect to it. I think that's actually why it does receive a certain amount of acclaim within film circles, is that there's enough distance being put between the audience and the reality of what they're seeing that I think some people have a bit of an ironic attachment to it. But I really don't think that Evil Dead is an ironic film. I don't think it's a satire, Evil Dead 2 instead is a very genuine attempt by a filmmaker who is very frightened of horror films to make a horror film which people will love. And since he doesn't have all the usual tools of a horror director, in the first one it comes out goofy kind of on accident, but in the second one he leans much more into his skill set, and instead of creating a parody of the original, what it does is elevate the original into something very special and something very new. Raimi creates a constantly escalating horror crowd pleaser, but he directs every scene as if he's doing the biggest Three Stooges routine you've ever watched. Raimi fuses the mechanisms of horror and comedy together, taking scary moments and cranking them up until they become hilarious, and taking comedy moments and turning them on a dime into something very gross or disturbing. I think this is part of why it forms such a fantastic intro to the genre, or at least it did for me as a kid with my friends. It's a kind of carnival ride through the horror genre, taking you through so many little tricks and tropes and so many delights, and it never gets too intense. I would compare it to something like Houseu, the Japanese horror film, but it's a little bit more accessible, I think, to a young American audience than Houseu would be. On top of this, the visuals are actually quite beautiful. I really like this interpretation of the classic Cabin in the Woods B-movie. It's very similar to the first, but everything is just so much more refined, and that really sells everything that we see. There is a really high level of craftsmanship to this film. There are so many low-budget horror tricks being pulled off, but they're being done by people that both know their craft and are very passionate about what they're making. And it all comes together to create a unique experience that only film is capable of, and specifically only this type of film, not an intellectual, deep exploration of the soul. Evil Dead 2 is a ride, but it's an incredibly well-made ride. In fact, I think Evil Dead 2 is not just a good film, I think it should really be considered a great film. It represents the height of craftsmanship and creativity in the horror genre. And really, I think, if anything, Evil Dead 2 can be viewed as a celebration of the genre by someone who wasn't actually all that familiar with it. And so, even though there may not be any grand, thought-provoking message to Evil Dead 2, I don't really see this as a serious negative. I don't need Evil Dead 2 to have a life-changing message. What was life-changing about it for me was the excitement of filmmaking, was the excitement of just watching the magic. And that is something that we need to keep in mind. We must always be mindful of the ecstatic nature of film, the ecstatic nature of art in general. Every film is the work of countless artists over days, weeks, months, in some very rare cases, decades. But a great expanse of time and energy from many viewpoints and many hands goes into a film. So they are not as simple as some type of mathematical equation you can add up. Even the most didactic films require a certain amount of collaboration and therefore require a certain amount of control to be given up. Academia is, frankly, from what I've seen, not well suited for handling film. And I mean, film criticism in general right now is just an abomination. There's pretty much, there's very few people I would even bother to pay attention to right now. Because the view we've developed, this hierarchical, objective search for quality in film, it's backwards. It's completely backwards. We first need to find the ecstatic, indescribable feeling and power of a film. And then we can build from there to explain the formal elements. And trust me, I think it's fascinating to go through those elements. In fact, the rest of this series will likely be a much more, intellectual, analytic take on films. But I specifically wanted to start here because Evil Dead 2 really represents the core joy of film to me, of filmmaking to me. Intellectualism, themes, subtext, these are all, of course, incredibly important. Of course, I'm not saying that you should not be invested in these things. You absolutely should. You absolutely should. But that needs to be built on top of a love for the medium. And I feel that while intellectualism expands your love of the medium, it first has to come somewhere from the heart. So I encourage you to try and find what those films are that do that for you. While certainly many people will simply just not share this love of Evil Dead 2 that I have, that is fine. I have seen many movies and have had my own set of life experiences, as well as, my own brain quirks. And that all comes to form how I will take in any film. That's not a problem, in my opinion. That's the basis of art. That is part of the fun of it. That's why conversations about art can be so dynamic, because when you talk about art, you're also talking about yourself. When I talk about how much I love the opening of Evil Dead and just how many wonderful effects you get to see in a row, I'm saying that because I have a background where I'm familiar with these effects, where I have an attachment to them, where there's a joy in seeing those effects on screen for me. Many people just won't have that, and that is totally okay. So for me, after Evil Dead 2, it was unstoppable from there. I started watching James Rolfe's Cinemassacre, Monster Madness. I got lots of horror movies off of that. Got very into Godzilla. I still love Godzilla. And the Romero zombie films, and eventually Scorsese and Fincher. All the classic film bro ones, because those are the ones that were easy to find on Pirate Bay and also my friends' hard drives. And from there on out, I was a certified little film dork, and look where I am now, still watching and still talking about movies. So you can tune in for more episodes of RIP Cinema on this channel, and I'm also going to start doing some live streams on a secondary channel, which you can tune into for free live. The VOD will be just for patrons. So keep an eye out for that soon. It'll be a little bit looser talks. And the next episode of RIP Cinema should be very soon. This one was just kind of a quick intro. And yeah, stay tuned because we got lots of exciting stuff in the work. Oh, and last thing. I hear some people say they don't like Army of Darkness. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Army of Darkness, also a masterpiece. Just not the film I wanted to talk about today. No Army of Darkness hate. Oh, also the remake was good. I like the Evil Dead remake. They went for just pure trashy horror, and yeah, I like seeing that return to sleaze.